was a good friend.
And let's listen to Pavarotti. Put on Pavarotti.
Hello. Welcome to The Revealing. I am your host, Pavarotti, here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. As a disclaimer, this channel is for entertainment purposes. These are my opinions. I'm not here to slander anyone. So let's get started. By the way, I will be providing information, and I will be giving you my opinion on that information, and that opinion is mine and mine alone. Okay, so getting right into it. Several court docs dropped as it relates to the death penalty. These are documents for each one of the objections. These are defense responses to the objections of the prosecution's objections to the defense's motions. Clear as day, right? So there's about 14 of them that dropped, and it's all going to be discussing, what we've discussed the last couple of times that these have dropped. It's the same motions. They're just simply making their arguments. Now, out of all of them, these are basically, you can tell they're mainly Jay Logsdon. And although he's making some excellent arguments, I think in all of them, it's kind of let's throw it all against the wall. Maybe one of them will stick approach, even though his arguments I feel like are pretty good in all of them. But there's two of them that I do want to discuss because I think I think they hold some significance. And the other ones, I mean, they're good arguments. I don't think they're going to fly. That's just my opinion, and I know you don't want me to go through all of them. Other people out there have done it, but two of them in particular I think is very important for us to discuss. And one of them is going to be on Dr. Wolf, because I can already see that there's some confusion about what she'll be testifying to, and I think there's also opportunity there though in her testimony, so we'll discuss that. And the other one is a particular statement that he makes in one of these responses that I think is a telling statement for this entire case. And I'll show you why I feel that way. Let's take a look. Okay, so this is the one that I think is important to cover, and this is on the testimony of Dr. Barbara C. Wolf, MD. And, I watched some other people discussing this, and they were discussing how it was such a big deal to bring in Dr. Wolf because of her expertise in being a medical examiner, and how she, actually testified in the O.J. Simpson trial, and how much somebody like this could do for the case here. And I don't disagree with that at all. I think it's great, especially when you think about findings she might have as it relates to the autopsies performed on the victims. But I think there's something to keep in mind in this particular hearing. And you can see it says, comes now, Bryan Kohberger, buying through his attorney record, submits the following reply to the state's objection to the testimony of Dr. Wolf. The state's objection is based on its objection to his motion as to the method of execution statutorily permitted in Idaho, which is in part that it is premature. Mr. Kohberger's reply to that argument relies on the argument here as to why the court should permit Dr. Wolf to testify. So the main focus on Dr. Wolf in that argument is not going to be testifying on anything to do with how the victims in the case and their autopsies or anything about that. What she's going to be testifying to in this particular trial is methods of execution statutorily permitted in Idaho. So there's only two that I'm aware of right now that's statutorily permitted, and one is lethal injection, and the other one is the firing squad. And I believe what she's going to testify on is cruel and unusual punishment as it relates to both of those methods. And her part is going to be to testify on, medical opinions on how each of those, causes suffering to the person that is being executed in that manner. Now, I don't think it's possible, but it would sure be interesting if somehow Ann Taylor could weave some of her expert testimony on, the findings she has in the case on the victims' autopsies into this hearing in some way. But I don't think that's going to be possible. I think they're going to have to focus testimony on this particular subject. But that is the key to Dr. Wolf. Now, just because she's their expert testifying in this particular instance doesn't mean that she isn't their expert when, we get to trial and they get to any type of forensics on the actual crime scene and the victims themselves. And, this could be a very, very strong expert in their corner, especially with her history. But I don't want anybody to really try to get their hopes up too much that Dr. Wolf is going to be able to do something in this particular hearing on November 7th that's not going to be something the defense is able to pull off. So that is that one. And let's take a look at the other example I wanted to give you. Okay, so after going through all of these documents, I think this one contains the statement that tells the story of this entire case in one sentence. And this is the reply to the state's objection to defendant's motion to strike notice of intent to seek the death penalty on grounds of failure to present aggravators to neutral fact finder. And it goes through a lot of arguing here. It's very good arguments, cases being cited. But when you go through it all, it starts to really come into picture right in here. When he starts to talk about Mr. Kohberger's not quibble with the prosecutor's ability to be lenient. His argument is with the prosecutor's ability to seek death. Mr. Kohberger is not requesting that there be a requirement that death be sought in every first-degree murder case so as to give a neutral fact finder the ability to decide if death is sought. Such a rule would come to nothing since the charging decision itself would function to allow prosecutors to decide who would receive this treatment. Mr. Kohberger is arguing that if a prosecutor chooses to seek death just as the charging decision, that this be determined by a neutral fact finder at the start of the process. So his argument here as it starts to come into picture is the fact that the prosecutor decides and gets to decide and decides when he decides if he's going to seek the death penalty or not. And their argument is to take that decision away from a prosecutor and put it in the hands of a neutral third party. But not only to do that, give it to a neutral fact finder is what they're actually describing it as. But not only to do that, but to do it at a certain time in the process. And this is not just regarding his case, this is an argument regarding cases in general. But it's important, and I'll explain why as we get a little further into this. As to the state's second argument, Mr. Kohberger's aim is not to make death determinations more reliable, whatever that might mean. He seeks a process that will genuinely narrow the class of persons eligible for the death penalty and must reasonably justify the imposition of a more severe sentence on the defendant compared to others found guilty of murder. And he cites his case, but listen to this statement right here. I think it tells you everything you need to know. He also seeks to prevent the usage of the death penalty in cases where it does not belong to force pleas from defendants. So he also seeks to prevent the usage of the death penalty in cases where it does not belong to force pleas from defendants. The state provides no response to these concerns, likely because it recognizes the current system provides no assurances. Mr. Kohberger asked this court to hold that until it does. The death penalty may not be sought. So what he's saying right here is the whole purpose in this case, in my opinion, with the lack of evidence that it has, the whole purpose of them seeking the death penalty is to force him to plead guilty to a lesser charge so that he wouldn't receive death. And you can bet in many cases where the death penalty is on the table and then you all of a sudden see them take it off the table and the defendant pleads guilty and gets a life sentence, those are the ones that the Innocent Project should really go dive into, because those are the ones where the death penalty has been used to force a plea from the defendant. So very, very important things right there. So when you start to look at this case since the beginning, why did Kohberger extend out initially his preliminary hearing? Right? He had a right to a speedy preliminary hearing. Well, he couldn't get the evidence from the prosecutor to have an effective preliminary hearing, so they extended out. Why did he extend out the evidentiary hearing? And he had to extend that out because they couldn't get the discovery from the prosecutor. They went to a grand jury indictment instead. And then why did he extend out his speedy trial date? Once again, he couldn't get the information from the prosecutor, and based on the evidence they had in their hand at the time, it would have been enough to convict. He needed the evidence from the prosecutor to prove his innocence. So now he's talking about how they're using the death penalty to try to force a plea. And the death penalty should be taken off the table just for that reason alone. So anyway, I thought that was an important thing out of all of the arguments that I've read in all of the filings. I thought that was one of the most important lines that I read. But we'll keep on it. If anything else pops up, we'll absolutely put an update on all the other things. I think that Jay Logsdon makes a great argument on every one of them, but I think they're going to fall short just based on merit alone. This argument right here, though, I think it actually holds a little bit of weight. This may be the one that gets them, in my opinion, but we'll see. So that's the update on where we're at as of right now. We'll keep our eyes peeled. If anything significant pops up, of course, we'll pull it up and report on it as always. But in the meantime, please like and subscribe to the channel. Post your comments, thoughts, criticisms. Until next time, Pavarotti's out.